Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bodybuilding.com podcast. I'm Nick Coleus, and Heather Eastman is here with me as well. Today, we're audio only because we just had a Skype call with Ross Edgley. He's a best-selling author in the UK who, over the last 10 years or so, has built his legend by embracing all kinds of crazy strength and endurance challenges. He ran a marathon, pulling a Mini behind him, and I think a truck another time. He rope climbed the height of Mount Everest, and then he also did what he called a Tree-athlon, where he completed a try while carrying a rather large log on his back. So his current obsession is what he calls strongman swimming, which is long-distance open water swimming, either on his own or pulling logs behind him. And he does all of this while weighing in at a pretty jacked 220 or so, and he's staying incredibly lean and muscular, lifting weights a lot. It's a really interesting guy, and he's written about everything he's learned in a new book called The World's Fittest Book, How to Train for Anything and Everything, Anywhere and Everywhere. If you like books like Born to Run or 4-Hour Body, it's really in that same vein. It's about him running with the Bushmen in Namibia on one page, and then he's deadlifting with Andy Bolton, the first man to pull 1,000 pounds on the next page. And then it's about how to add muscle and live below 10% body fat year-round, that sort of stuff. We had a just fantastic conversation, so let's listen in. Start the podcast here.
Start.
All right, so let's start with the basics. What did you do today? I remember looking at a video you did on Red Bull. That's exactly, yeah. I remember watching a video on Red Bull where you kind of went over, okay, here's all the training, there's another one, here's everything I ate. And it was a pretty damn packed day from sun up to sundown. I'm just curious, what did you actually do today?
Yeah, no. So today was a little bit extreme. So I wanted. It wasn't necessarily an ordinary day today, but I suppose since you asked, I'll tell you what I did today. So it was up at 4 o'clock today, since we had a little bit of filming to do. And this is going to sound so weird, but because we've got the book tour coming up, I'm doing a lot of filming, and they wanted to do a really cool time-lapse video of me swimming through sunrise. So they just said, Ross, you can just swim 30K, right? Just in the pool. And I was like, I suppose I'm going to have to. So today it was, 30 kilometers today in a 25-meter pool, which got pretty boring.
Oh, my God.
30 kilometers in a 25-meter pool?
Yeah, that's...
okay, if I'm doing some rough math.
That's what, 50,000 times back and forth? I don't know, what is that?
Yeah,
it's a lot, is what it is.
It was pretty bad. It was just, but it's also as well. I mean, I say with this, they're so kind down the swimming pool, and they always just kind of rail off a lane at the end and just go like, look, he's going to be there for a while, and I can just bring what is essentially a picnic, and I just put it on the side of the pool, and I'm just nailing porridge oats, and I mean, you'll know, Nick, as well, with your endurance background, it's an eating competition. Mm-hmm. It's not even a competition. It's just how much you can kind of stomach. So
yeah, I enjoyed. You had a video about swimming 100 kilometers in a pool recently, and you called it basically an eating competition with a little bit of swimming.
Exactly.
One thing I liked about about that one in particular, when you swam 100K, was just 15 hours in. This is like a 40-hour swim or whatever it is. You're already smiling to keep away the tears. You said like you're out there pretty early in the process, kind of punchy, and by the end of it, like you're out there. You make mistakes, you suffer, you kind of lose your mind. And I'm wondering, like, do you have to lose your mind? Is that part of the strategy in all this?
Yeah, I think with swimming, I mean, with all endurance events, I find swimming's a little bit different. I mean, I love trail running, fell running. We were just talking about that, and I think it's you against the elements. Some of the scenery is amazing, but with swimming, sometimes you are staring at the bottom of a pool for well, in that case, it was 48 hours. So it's just this sheer sensory deprivation, mm-hmm. And if your mind can wander, and that can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. Like if you've got any, and I was chatting to the Royal Marines about this. So I did the 48-hour swim down at Limestone with the Royal Marines. And what was really nice is because it played with the parameters of conventional sport, it was nice that I could chat to the Royal Marines, and 36 hours in, I'll be saying, guys, I'm kind of hallucinating a little bit. I think I keep seeing fish. And they were like, no, there's no fish in the pool. I was like, all right, cool, just checking. And it was so nice that it was so, like, they'd been through that. Mm-hmm. And it was nice to exchange just ideologies. And genuinely, that's why I love what you do on the podcast, because it's just an exchange of ideas. And ultimately, sometimes that's a lost art form, because I think too many people are so keen to get on their keyboards and go and pull up this study and that study. And it's just like, well, what about actually just getting in the trenches?
Right.
And exchanging these ideas with people who have been there.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's one thing we appreciate about Chris Gethin is that he is willing to experiment on himself.
And talk you through it. Talk you through the whole
tell
process.
You exactly what's
it's
going
in
on.
a very personal way. That was, yeah. So as an event like this gets closer, though, is that delirium? Is that something that you find yourself being afraid of, or is it something that you start to crave a little bit? What's your relationship with it?
Oh, that's a good question. Only because, and I recently spoke about this. I gave a lecture on Tim Noakes' idea of the central governor theory. Mm-hmm. Just saying that fatigue is an emotionally driven state that is basically tricking or triggering the body to pull the handbrake on, that physiological handbrake, to say, whoa, because your body likes homeostasis. It likes this habitual level. It likes to be, comfortable. And all of a sudden, if you're saying, right, we're going to go and swim for 48 hours, your body's going to go, no, that doesn't seem like a good idea. And so, you have this constant conversation between your mind and your body, and your mind is saying, whoa, you're in danger, stop. Whereas in reality, the central governor theory is saying you have so much more to give at that point. At the point where you really think you're about to stop, the Navy SEALs say you're really at 40%.
Mm-hmm.
You have that much.
You brought that up. I was going to say that. That's a Navy SEAL thing, is that it's the 40% rule, right? When you feel like you want to quit, you're only at 40%.
Yeah. So, have you seen David Goggins? Are you familiar with him? He was on the Joe Rogan podcast.
Yes.
And yeah, he's exactly the same. And he says that, I mean, when he talks about his pull-up record, and you see the state of his hands, I think it was the most pull-ups in 24 hours. Like, his hands are so blistered, but you think that wouldn't have happened. Like, it wasn't just one tear. It would have just accumulated over hours and hours. So you think, what must he have gone through to get to that point? And so, sorry, Nick, looping back around to your actual question, which was, do you crave it? I think I crave getting to that point, because when you get to that point, you ask yourself, like, are you going to continue? Mm-hmm. And it's the law of excessive overload. I think a lot of people will talk about, when you get to that point, to use, bodybuilding, you're training for muscular hypertrophy, and you're doing a horrible drop set where you're trying to induce this kind of metabolic stress, like Dorian Yates, Mike Mensa type training, or German volume training. You're on your 10th set, 10th rep, and really you're going to have a conversation with yourself. Do you really want this? Mm-hmm. And if you finish it, it's like, brilliant. And I think endurance for me is the equivalent to that. And I think that bonds all athletes. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
No, I like it. Yeah. Only in addition to having that conversation with your hands and your muscles, you're also having it with the fish at the bottom of the swimming pool.
Exactly. And my area of expertise is endurance running and a little bit of CrossFit, and they talk about the same thing. They call it the psychological threshold, where you write out, and I'm sorry, I don't know if I introduced myself. I'm Heather, by the way.
This is Heather.
Yes. And the psychological threshold is you sit there and you look at the entire workout, and it's meant to scare you. It's meant to kind of terrify you, and then you just have to push your body through it and push your mind through it anyway. And I always said there are two kinds of CrossFitters. There's those who are mentally tough and those who have the physical strength. And the mentally tough ones will beat out the physical ones every single time.
Wow. Do you find, I find that fascinating as well there, Heather, just because, have you ever seen Gold Rush, which was a documentary on the British rowing team? Mm-hmm. Yeah. They, to your point about, like, it should scare you, mm-hmm. like, they were actually, before an erg test, before they were actually doing a crazy VO2 test, mm-hmm. they would actually be sick beforehand because their body almost knew what was coming. And there's a brilliant documentary as well on Sir Chris Hoy, who was one of our greatest ever cyclists. And you see when he's doing similar interval training, it's really weird. Like and there's this calm in the gym, and he walks in, and then you see him, like, he sets up the bike, and all of a sudden, he makes sure it's all set how he wants. And then he goes out and he comes back and he lays down a mattress next to the bike. And you think, that's a bit odd. And appears, and he goes to another cupboard and he brings out a bucket and he puts the bucket next to the bed, and it's all laid out perfectly. And then he starts his intervals, and it's not until afterwards when you see him just fall off in a complete, like, sheer fatigue, and he's convulsing, like he's trying to be sick but he's got nothing to give. And it's like, that's where you have to put your body. Within the book we talk about, Hans Selye, 1936, law of adaptation, and they just found that stress and stimuli is the key to adaptation, and it it bonds all athletes, you know, whether it's CrossFit and ultra running, strength training, it doesn't matter. And I think that's what's so great about what you guys do, certainly what I try to do with the book, that it's just getting people to ask the question, are you actually subjecting your body to enough stress and stimuli to adapt? Because often people aren't, and they're not, to Heather's point, prepared to go there, you know, to that horrible place where you're going to cause your body to adapt.
Yeah, no, it's interesting talking about this too, because the way you describe it, it sounds like something that's very difficult to train for, right? And watching how you in this other video, watching how you train, it seems like there's a lot of concurrent training going on in what you're doing right now. You submit yourself to a lot of different muscular training, a lot of different energy system training, and there's really two ways people can prepare for these things. They can specialize, or they can do, you know, a lot of cross training, a lot of concurrent training. And I feel like throughout the book, The World's Fittest Book, you present a lot of different complete workout plans. They're all pretty specialized, though. And I'm wondering how you find that line between concurrent training and specialized training at this point, especially now that you're doing things for, you know, longer periods of time, swimming 100 days straight coming up or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good question. Only because, you know, and for those listening, talking about concurrent training. So Robert Hickson, 1980s, found that training for strength and stamina was not optimal. The two could not coexist. He said, and I quote, you dilute the potency of the stimuli. So on a cellular level, your body doesn't quite know what to adapt to. So if you're going to try and beat your 5K running time, but also try and put up a 1 rep max on deadlift, the two aren't going to be optimal. However, and you're absolutely right, within the World's Fittest book, we talk about how looking at stress and stimuli and the potency of that signal you're sending to your body, if you're able to separate your workout, so in any given day, everybody has 24 hours. And Verkhoshansky, one of the greatest strength conditioning coaches that's ever lived, talks about this idea of adaptive energy. So in 24 hours, say I'm handed, Nick and Heather, and you come to me and say, okay, I'm going to train for CrossFit, and I'm going to be training for, an ultra run. I know that I've only got a certain amount of adaptive energy if I'm coaching you, and you only have a certain amount in your body. So there's no point in me saying, Nick, for your ultra run, we're going to start every morning with, some metabolic conditioning and legs, and we're going to see what you got on in the squat rack. Because that's just completely not conducive to what you're training for. But by being so specific, so sorry to loop back around on concurrent training, if you were to say, right, in the morning, our goal is, and I always say in a single tweet, if you can say what you're training for. So if somebody stops me in the morning and they see that I've got my picnic on the side of the swimming pool and I'm swimming up and down 30K, and they stop me and say, what are you training for, Ross? I have to be able in a sentence to answer them. And I can say, I'm drilling efficient biomechanics through the water, aerobic fitness, and my energy pathways. Done. And they'll go, oh, wow, that was pretty clear and concise. I'm like, yeah. So my body knows what it's adapting to. Then if I've got enough adaptive energy in the afternoon, I'll be able to possibly strength train. And then if somebody stops me and says, Ross, I see you're on the Olympic lifting mat there, Ross. What are you doing? And I'll say, I am training strength, my body's ability to generate force, clear and concise. That's, oh, okay. So by separating those workouts, you make each workout very clear, again, potency of the stimuli, but within that 24-hour period, you're also considering the body in its entirety. Again, going back to adaptive energy. If I didn't have enough adaptive energy, I wouldn't hit the weights in the afternoon because it wouldn't be conducive to my goal in the first place, which is swimming based. So sorry, it was exactly the same with you guys there, that if it was like, okay, wait, stop, Nick, what are you doing? Is that conducive to running an ultra marathon? No, then don't do it. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
That's great. Yeah, but you're also you're expanding your adaptive capacity, which is something you talk about in the book a lot. Like, what am I doing? Aside from all the specific skills you're developing, you're always training your ability to adapt and handle more.
That's a great point. And I think that's what I love about CrossFit, the emphasis on work capacity. So your body's ability to perform and positively tolerate training of a given intensity and duration. And I think what CrossFit has done is taken almost the Soviet principle of general physical preparedness and just applied it on this kind of mass scale. And that's why I love what CrossFit has really done, because even if you don't compete at CrossFit, it will then allow you to have that work capacity to then later specialize. And I think it's exactly that. And I think the industry was slightly going towards minimalist training. A lot of people saying, and you'll know this, Nick, that people will say, oh, I'm going to train for a fell run, a trail run, but I'm only going to do interval training. And it's just like, yeah, absolutely. Physiologically, you will see improvements in anaerobic and aerobic fitness, but there is no substitute for actually getting out on the mountains and drilling those motor patterns. And I think, slight tangent.
But makes sense. Yeah. And one interesting thing about the conversations we've had with Chris Gethin about this was that unlike the way that you described, where you're practicing your sport, you're practicing that full body in the morning, and then more specifically strength training in the afternoon. He liked to use strength training as a pre-exhaust before his endurance work, as a way to kind of get more out of less volume. So before he'd go swimming, he'd do triceps and shoulders, and then he'd do a horrible leg workout before he went running or cycling. And he felt like that allowed him to kind of hack the amount of volume that most endurance athletes use. And yeah, I was wondering if you've tried that approach, or if you feel like, I get up, I got to swim. If I'm going to do it with my Olympic lifting, it's hours later.
Yeah, and that's what's really interesting as well, what Chris does, because a lot of these studies out there are done under quite controlled conditions. And I think if you manipulate those conditions, exactly like Chris is doing, there's on a lot of test subjects, for instance, to use Chris Gethin as an example, there just wouldn't be many test subjects like him. Like, where are you going to find like Chris Gethins? Like, you're just not. So that's why I love what he did and broadcast to the fitness community. And I think, Alex Vaid is another one.
Right.
What they do is amazing. But they're not anomalies, but they're just quite unique test subjects. So to come back to your question about, I have experimented with that, but my main goal would be, because of the distances that I'm swimming, movement efficiency. So to do them fatigued, and then if I did 30 kilometers fatigued, I would just be drilling worse and worse biomechanics. So for me, only because my goal is very slightly different to Chris's, Chris openly was like, I want to complete an Ironman and hold all this muscle mass. Whereas with me, I'm more in the school of thought, I'll let Mother Nature take care of my physiology. So last year, swimming 100 kilometers, towing a 100-pound tree, by the end, I was like, I don't care how I look as long as I finish. So I suppose I'm slightly different in the conditions that I'm creating compared to Chris.
Slightly, though, but you're still, well over 200 pounds, and you still are a very muscular individual who is allergic to shirts by all appearances. I mean, let's not.
Do you wear a shirt in this spot?
I didn't see any shirts in there, but I mean, it makes me wonder though. Like every one of the athletes you interact with in the book, like you have Andy Bolton in there, you have the Namibian Bushmen in there. They all have a different relationship with, or a different portioning of muscle. And you yourself still look a little bit more like a bodybuilder than a swimmer, even a muscular swimmer. And I'm wondering what your relationship with muscle is like and how it's changed over time.
Yeah, because I think I've never really been asked it like that, but it's a good question. Only because I was a swimmer, so that was my first sport, but I was never going to make sort of Great Britain Olympic standard. Because as I was saying off air, I am built like a hobbit. So at 5'8", my coach just came over to me and was like, Ross, unless you grow another foot, basically, it's not going to happen for you. So I'm still waiting for my growth spurt. It hasn't happened yet. So they said, look, so why don't you try water polo instead? So I then moved into water polo because I was always quite strong. But at the age of 14, I was playing at senior level. And I think it was in the south of France. We were playing in the Europeans, and I just got beaten up by men. They were fully developed. They had beards, and I just didn't stand a chance. So my coach was like, look, Ross, you need to get stronger to actually hold your own. So that's when I started to strength train, just to almost both structural and functional strength training. So structural being muscular hypertrophy to actually develop more size, but also functional as well. So to actually just get stronger without adding more muscle mass, because it was very, very important I didn't add any more muscle mass than I actually needed. And the other thing that I'm experimenting with now is I would argue, and actually I'd love to ask your opinion on this, Nick and Heather, which is at the moment in weight-bearing sports where gravity is impacting, like running, yes, absolutely. Your relationship with gravity, so your weight, is going to be a hindrance if you're heavy. I mean, some of my friends who are fell runners, they bulk up to 65 kilos.
I'll answer that question. So I was a distance runner in high school, and then I put on about 25 pounds of muscle to compete in bodybuilding.
Wow.
And putting on that much muscle, I'm 5'9", so I've got an inch on you. But I put on 25 pounds of muscle and I couldn't run anymore, or at least I couldn't run with the same mechanics. So then people ask me, why don't you compete anymore? And I said, I don't want to keep the muscle that's going to prevent me from running. Because with what you're saying, with the gravity-based sports where every pound of muscle is now a pound that you have to carry, it does make a huge difference. So I don't know if I didn't let you finish your question, but I was just going to jump in and kind of my personal experience with that, because 25 pounds on a 5'9" frame for a female is a lot of extra weight to carry.
And for somebody who's a fell runner or something like that, it's both a bigger engine, but also a trailer behind the truck.
Right,
either way, there's a push and pull for it for sure.
Literally, like it's all back there, and it's heavy to carry.
Yeah, because they say that even adding 1 kg of additional weight, it's time to fatigue, lactic threshold, pulmonary ventilation, like biomechanics. It all changes just with 1 kg. So that's incredible, Heather. So where did you find it limiting you? Was it biomechanics? Were you fatiguing in the legs? Was it lactic threshold? Were you breathing harder? Where did you find it?
It was literally the mechanics. I started out at 120 pounds, and then I ballooned up to, I think my heaviest was 160 pounds at my heaviest. And so that's actually a 40-pound difference. And so imagine that's like trying to run with a 40-pound vest on, which if you put a vest on, it's up on your torso, which your torso is designed to carry a lot of weight. But for me, I gained that weight in my legs more than anything. So now what's supposed to be propelling me is actually heavier. So physically moving those legs every single step was too heavy, and I couldn't run with the same mechanics.
Oh, really?
So I had to change my stride, I had to change my cadence, I had to change how my foot hit the ground each time, so now I run differently than I did in high school, but I don't run the way I did when I was competing in bodybuilding, if that makes sense. Like there's three very distinct running styles for all those different weights. I'm right in the middle right now. I'm about 135. She's
220 pounds right now. 9% body fat.
Yeah. So, and this brings up another point, which we kind of run into being Bodybuilding.com and being very focused on a sport which is aesthetic based. Everyone's trying to get big muscles that look good. And in my experience, and Ross, perhaps you can speak to this as well, in my experience, when someone trains for a performance-based goal, I want to run a marathon, I want to lift 200 pounds, I want to, whatever the performance is, it actually is and this is my experience, let me know what you think, it's a better driving force for doing those workouts because it's not based on how you look and feel, it's based on what you can do.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. So when you're when you're out working with these elite athletes, they are forced to be able to do things, and it doesn't really matter what their body looks like. Half the time their body looks great, but it's because they have to perform. So what are your experiences with that?
I completely agree, only because I think aesthetics is so fluid. You could wake up in the morning holding a little bit more water retention. You might, your sodium, potassium, like there's so many things that could impact how you look on any given day, from the lighting in the mirror, if you go into a different mirror. And I think if you are extrinsically motivated like that, you'll be like, oh, what's the point? I've been training for 2 weeks and I look awful, do you know? And I think by focusing on quite often, the bar doesn't lie. So if you're going and you're, trying to put up a bigger squat, bench, deadlift, and your goal is also, holding more muscle mass, then inevitably you are going to induce muscular hypertrophy through mechanical tension. So the 3 ways to build muscle mass: mechanical tension, metabolic stress, muscle damage. And you are going to target one of those if you're just going into the gym and trying to move more weight on the bar. So I think you're so right, Heather. I think, and this starts to go down the rabbit hole of behavioral science and psychology as well. And I think it's only now that we're really looking at a friend of mine, John Keeley, says it brilliantly. He says, too often we're trying to apply a simple mechanical solution to a complex biological reality. And what he means by that is we're trying to put this human body into, like sets, reps, calories, weight schemes. And it's just like, it doesn't work like that. You have to understand the athlete, or if you're training yourself, like you said there, Heather, your motives. So I agree. I mean, what do you think, Nick? Have you found that as well?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think one interesting thing about you, if we're talking about muscle here as well, is you've written about how you think that getting back to gravity sports versus swimming, that having a larger muscle bound frame actually can provide a distinct advantage. So sort of blurring the lines here. We're not just talking about hypertrophy for hypertrophy's sake anymore. It seems like you are coming around to the idea for your particular sport that it provides an advantage in the water.
Yeah, and that is another, because and it's only just recently, really, since immersing myself in triathlons, Ironman, and open water swimming, and so many of my training partners are incredible endurance athletes. And what I found is when we all start getting to the 20-kilometer mark during a swim, they are all just struggling. They can't hold efficient biomechanics. A few of them said, I can't grip the water. My forearm's actually cramping. And we joke, and they're saying swimming's a strength-based sport for some of them. And I'm like, really? Like, it's not that bad. And then it actually gets to the point where they're feeding as well. They're having to feed every, 10 minutes, even less. Whereas holding more muscle mass, you're inevitably going to hold more muscle glycogen as well. So almost, and I liken myself to some of my friends, they're incredible swimmers. And I say they're like dolphins or sharks. They're rapid, they are quick. But in many ways, I'm just like this tiny whale. And although I won't necessarily go as quick, when we start getting to 20 kilometers and they're just flagging and many of them dropping out, I'm like, I honestly feel like I'm just getting warmed up. Like this. And then some of them, and this is sort of going down the rabbit hole of nutritional pathways as well, but a lot of them as well, I think this is purely anecdotal, but looking at bodybuilders, and Heather, maybe you can back me up on this. You can eat. Like, I think when you probably put on those 40 pounds, did you find that your appetite and your sort of eating patterns just completely changed?
They did. And with bodybuilding, that's what most bodybuilders will complain of, is that it's so hard to feed that muscle every single day. And for me, that's part of it, is I love to eat, and even I can't eat enough to keep that kind of muscle on my frame. And it gets in the way of training, all of a sudden, and this is why bodybuilders have to be so specific about when they eat, when they train, when they eat again. And so I'm much more of a holistic approach. I want to be able to live a life where I can, hop down to the gym and work out, but then kind of eat whenever I want and not have to have things so dialed in. And so I think that, to your point, there is an advantage to having muscle. I noticed the advantage to having muscle in pull-ups, which is a gravity-based sport, but I didn't have the muscle mass to do pull-ups when I was 120 pounds, but even though I weigh 20 pounds more, so it should be harder for me to do pull-ups, I have the endurance to do pull-ups because I have the muscle, the strength, and like you said, the glycogen to support that. And same thing with running. Yes, I changed my cadence, but my legs don't get sore or tired the way they used to. It's a different way. But
Wow.
So and things change.
I think so. I mean, Nick, and coming from your sport, do you find, and I'm always so interested in, do you find that sometimes the best runners, and I've seen it time and again with people getting it wrong at Kona, there are better athletes, but their nutritional strategies were all wrong. Do you find that sometimes the guy that wins an ultra race will be the best at eating, not necessarily the best at running?
Ultra races they're a hard one because I think there are a lot of complete freaks in that particular discipline, and then there are also just people who are willing to get as close as possible to dying
Right.
You know,
Right.
so and that's a skill in itself. Like, how far are you willing to go? I don't do particularly long races. I like to, you know, somewhere in the 20 to 25 miles and to take my time nice and slow. But I did a race last year where there were a bunch of 100-milers who were finishing at the same time as I did. And I remember looking at them as they were crossing the finish line. And I was like, this is amazing. These people, they're 65, 70 years old and they just ran a 100-mile race. I'm so proud of them. And then I looked at the results and they're all like 28, 35 years old. And, you know, they're coming across the finish line. And this one guy was bright yellow. And I thought, oh my God, his liver is failing. He was out there for 2 nights without sleep. And I thought, you know, I mean, yeah, clearly he has his nutrition dialed in order to be able to finish. Half the field didn't finish this race. But his primary advantage seemed to be that he was willing to die out there if necessary. And I think he won, you know? So those people are different. I mean, muscle is, I feel like, a real advantage in those sorts of events, though, depending on where you put it, because the thing that is the most inefficient about runners, and anybody who's ever watched, you know, the last 5 miles of a marathon can attest to this, is their posture is just horrible. They're collapsed forward. And the more muscle you can add in your postural muscles, I feel like, the better, right? So it's all about where you put it. You know, in terms of leg training and things like that, yeah, it's really hard. I see the same things you see where people, you know, they're just busting these horrible interval workouts thinking it's going to make them faster somehow, whereas if they just did some strategic strength training in their posture, they would be so much more efficient. And that's what you're ultimately talking about, is efficiency.
Is exactly it, yeah. And I think, and just touching upon that as well, what I love about ultras is if we all lined up against Usain Bolt, 10 times out of 10 he would beat us, you know, on a 100-meter race. There's not really an awful lot that we could do. Genetically, he is just superior. But what is so interesting I found about an ultra is there's so many different variables, and things just go right or wrong. And like you said, mental fortitude, like you can't measure it. But ultimately, that is going to be one of the determining factors, even though it's completely subjective and you can't measure it. And yeah, and even postural muscles, exactly what you just said as well. You know, things like that, ligaments, tendons, biomechanics, you know, to the untrained eye, you're like, I don't understand why that guy's won. You know, but to the trained eye, you can go, yeah, because his movement efficiency was incredible. You know, and I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent, but I'm so excited right now. I think we're on the cusp of a 2-hour marathon. And I can't wait to see it done, because I want to look back and see, why is it that we couldn't do that for so long? I mean, you know, Roger Bannister, first guy to run the 4-minute mile, they said at the time, you know, leading physicians said a human cannot run under a 4-minute mile, his lungs will explode. And Roger Bannister was actually a medical student himself at the time, and just said, well, no, you know, I disagree, you know, laced up his trainers, and the rest is history. But once he broke the 4-minute mile, there was some crazy fact that over the next 3 months, you know, something like 10, loads of people just went under that form. What was, you know, previously seen was impossible. Once somebody did it, it was just kind of like the floodgates open, central governor theory. All of a sudden, like, athletes were like, oh, it is possible. So all of a sudden, they lifted that physiological handbrake. And that's what I find so interesting in every single sport. Even strength training as well. You know, I think it's so, anyone who's lifted will know, as soon as you unrack the bar and you're squatting, if you tell yourself you've not got it, that's very powerful. Neurologically, something's going on and your body's just going, wow, no, you know, this isn't going to happen.
Sure.
So bench. It's same with the deadlift. If you just like lift it and you think that's cemented to the floor, like this, then it's not going to come off the floor. And so, yeah, it's just, I find it amazing. And I think we're only scratching the surface on, you know, that kind of mind-body connection.
Now, to bring it back to swimming for a second, though, one disadvantage that I've been told about muscle in the water, I mean, there's a lot of the great swimmers have a slightly higher level of body fat, because otherwise they find that they just sink like a stone. That was the first thing Chris Gethin told us after his first swim. He said, oh my God, I didn't anticipate that at all. I went out there and I had to work harder, because otherwise I was going to sink to the bottom of the damn pool. Do you find that you can actually float fairly effectively, or do you sink to the bottom? Or is that one reason why you like to attach yourself to logs, is because it gives you a little buoyancy?
Yeah, no. So right now I am eating quite a lot. I do want a little bit of body fat. You know, some sort of buoyant body fat would be a good thing, because I had a body scan before I embarked on my 100-kilometer swim, and they just sat me down and said, Ross, you have no physical attributes to be a swimmer. They said you have more muscle mass, less body fat, and then even get this, they said you have a big head. And I was like, well, no, I know I have a big head. And they were like, dense skull. So like you are just torpedoing down to the ocean bed.
To the floor.
Exactly. But they said, and I'm sitting there with my head in my hands going, well, this is awful news. And they said, we have some good news, Ross, though. There is a saving grace. And I was like, fantastic. Please tell me. And they said, you have nice, shapely, womanly hips. So apparently I hold a lot of my fat around my legs and my bum.
They did not tell you that, did they?
Yeah, no, genuinely. Yeah, I will send you the link on. I think it's still on YouTube on the Red Bull documentary. But yeah, he says you have nice womanly hips.
Was the word shapely in there? I like that. That's a good word.
Was the best part of that word. Yeah.
I think it might have been.
No, I highly recommend this the Red Bull video series Strongman Swimming that they do with you. It's fantastic, and especially because nothing, you know, if you look in the book, nothing could be further from working with Bushmen or Andy Bolton, the first man to deadlift 1,000 pounds, than swimming pulling a log. And so I'm wondering how you arrive. Like some people may know you for the Tree-athlon, where you did a triathlon with a tree carrying it. But how did you arrive at swimming as the arena where you thought, like, okay, this is really where I want to push the limits in particular?
Yeah, so it's quite a long story. I'm going to try and keep it as short as possible. I suppose it all started with the world's strongest marathon, as the media called it, where I ran a marathon pulling a 1.4-ton car around Silverstone race circuit to raise money for the Teenage Cancer Trust. So we did it. It took ages, took me 19 hours, and I finally did it. After that, everyone was like, oh, Ross is really good at doing like long distances with heavy things. I'm like, right, okay, it's a weird skill set, but I'll take it. And then Nevis, which is a Caribbean island, very, very small, has ambitions to become the world's first carbon neutral island. So they said, look, we have an annual triathlon. Why don't you come out here and pull something or carry something heavy to raise awareness and money for a lot of our eco-friendly projects? Somebody said a tree. I said a triathlon, and so then I talked myself into doing a triathlon.
So it's all just a pun. The whole thing came out of a pun then, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we can relate to that.
Now you're speaking our language, unfortunately. We find ourselves to be very punny.
Good. I'm in good company. So yeah, it was after that. I mean, it was during the triathlon, and I at the start line, was speaking to my friends and my girlfriend. She was like, don't do anything stupid. I was like, I won't. And she was like, I know what you're like. You're going to race. I was like, I promise I won't. And I stood at the back to allow everybody, because there were some genuine, racers there, some real athletes. And I didn't want to get in their way with my tree. So I hung back. But then, like, I'm not going to lie, as soon as the gun went, I was like, oh, this is on. So I went sprinting with my tree into the water. And I actually came out the water in a decent position, overtook many people in the water with the tree. And afterwards, Kerry-Ann Payne, a friend of mine who's the double world champion, 10K, she said, like, you're weirdly quick with a tree. And I was like, no, I know, right? And she said, look, why don't we just see how far you can do it? So then, to sum up, I said great, and I wanted to swim the English Channel, pulling a tree. I rung up the English Channel, and I always say I wish I'd recorded this conversation. And I was like, it was the Port Authority, and I said, hello, it's Ross here. I want to swim across the English Channel. And they said, that's fine. We'll send you the paperwork. I said, fantastic. Just one small point. I want to do it towing a tree. And they said, well, you're not allowed. And I said, why not? And they said, because you're not a registered vessel. And to which I replied, I said, well, how do I become a registered vessel then? And then they hung up the phone on me.
You need more muscle mass. You need to be a little bit heavier in order to be a registered vessel.
Right. So that was when the Caribbean Tourism Board and St. Lucia heard about this, and they said, look, we've got 2 islands. Why don't you come and swim between these? So that was the weird way that all came about. So yeah.
Okay. So you still haven't gone to swim the channel with the tree? That hasn't happened yet?
Nope.
Okay.
No, but now, one in the book, one great line that you have about the triathlon is that riding a bike while pulling it was like the greatest ab workout ever invented. You said, right? Which made sense to me. It's like that's like a loaded carry. But how is swimming different in what the log actually imposes on you physically?
Yeah, purely, I think, like swimmers and sailors and anybody in the water, they spend, thousands, millions of pounds, certainly the sailors on their boats, to reduce drag. They want to travel through the water as efficiently as possible. And I'm doing the exact opposite. So I'm saying I'm going to tie a massive piece of wood to my trunks. So it was purely in terms of resistance, time to fatigue, lactic threshold. So that burning sensation in my shoulders would blow up so much quicker and easier, and feeding as well, feeding strategies. So that's purely all it was, really, is just like adding resistance in the form of a giant lump of wood, basically.
Okay.
So now you have something to pull against. And that can be its own kind of challenge.
What?
Well, I mean, because kind of going back to what you were talking about, looking at the bottom of the pool, and it's very, very boring. And, if all you're focusing on is just trying to be as efficient as possible, and that can get very, very dull for the mind. But then all of a sudden, if now you have an added element of you have to pull this tree, then
and an irregular tree,
and kind of to a lot of what you talk about with overloading, you're kind of overloading your mental system at that point, because you have a new challenge on top of that, and in many ways that can be a refreshing thing for the brain to have and for your body to have, is like, oh, okay, well, now I have this different challenge that can distract me from the real challenge, which is just swimming. Am I making any sense?
Do you know what, Heather? You're the first person to say that, but you're absolutely right. So when I was swimming, we were training for it, if a wave kind of caught the tree, it would almost act like a bungee cord. So I would get like a real sharp pull on my trunks. And then I know at that point that I have 100 pounds of wood coming at my feet like a torpedo. And so it was like keeping me preoccupied, because I'd be like, okay, best case scenario right now is it disappears past my shoulder. Worst case scenario is it goes into my shins, or, and it did on a few occasions, hit my feet and basically just took the toenail clean off. So it was kind of knowing like this, like a tug of war just across the Caribbean Sea with a tree. So it was weirdly, I don't want to say it kept me company, because that sounds odd, but there was this element of like, oh, at least I'm not alone doing this.
No, and that was a question that I had as well. Is how intimate do you get with your log? I mean, it's an odd question, perhaps, but do you find that you spend time with it, name it, talk to it, anything like that?
Yeah, no. So when we in St. Lucia, we finished there, it was it almost became a celebrity out there, and certainly the same in Nevis. And even now, people out in Nevis, they'll take pictures with the tree because it's at one of the beaches down there, and there's a hotel on the beach. So people will turn up and say, "Is this where the triathlon was?" And I sometimes just get tagged in a picture. So the tree's out there. He seems to be doing well. He's retired and just seems to get like, yeah, everyone's just there.
He's just
on the
riding
beach
your coattails now.
Exactly.
Riding your trunks. Now, did you have a lot of planning going into that? Was there a lineup of logs, or did you just walk out there and pick one though?
Yeah, now this is important, just because like and I became an expert in trees inadvertently throughout the year. But if you take certain trees are a lot more absorbent, so there was that element. So if you were 10K out and that tree had all of a sudden absorbed all the water, it was basically going down with you attached to it. And then other trees as well, just really not very efficient through the water. So yeah, but it was just, I think it came down, you'd have to pick a tree and it needed to just feel right. You'd go, okay, we've got a connection, and then we just set sail. Yeah.
To take this to another level, you were telling me in an email the other day about your next challenge. You're taking strongman swimming to yet another distance extreme, right? This is a little closer to home for you, though. You're not having to go out in the Caribbean for this one. So what's your next challenge?
It is, yes. When does this air, by the way? I'm wondering when people will hear about this. I don't know whether I'll be doing it at the time or still setting sail.
Probably in the next couple of weeks, actually. So
I'd probably be on my merry way by then.
Okay,
So,
yeah. Well, you know, let's say next Monday. We're going to put this thing out next Monday.
okay. I might still be here then, but you're right. Coming back from so this is again how it came about. So I did the 48-hour swim with the Royal Marines. I just wanted to see how far I could swim in 48 hours. After that, I was with the Royal Marines, and I was in the officers' mess, which is this kind of like grand room where they, you know, all sit down and discuss matters. And I came in, I had trench foot because I'd been in the water so long. And one of the officers over there, amazing mustache, and he's just like this old English Royal Marine, and he just says, what are you doing? I said, I've just finished a 48-hour swim. Just wanted to see how far I could swim. And he goes, why are you doing that? I said, I want to train for the world's longest current neutral swim. And he just said, that sounds a bit crap. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, it just sounds a bit long-winded. It just doesn't sound very good. And I said, well, what do you propose I do then? And he sat there and he considered his options, drunk his tea, and he turned to me and he says, do you know what you need to do? I said, go on. He says, you just need to man up and swim around Great Britain. That's what you need to do. So I was like, fine, all right.
Fine then, I'll do it.
So I was like, all right, fine. And we've sort of floated the idea with a few people. The sailing community has been amazing. And yeah, the support was incredible. And I think they were like, yeah, we want to see that done as well. So in a few weeks, or depending on when you're listening to this, I will probably be attempting to become the first person to swim all the way around Great Britain is the plan.
What distance is that? How far is that?
So, well, yeah, so it completely depends on the route and
the currents, right.
Yeah, a lot of this. So it could be as little as 3,000 kilometers. It could be as much as 5,000 to 6,000 kilometers. You know, so either way, it's going to be a long time, but it works out roughly. This is kind of best case scenario, and in theory, it works out 50 kilometers a day for 100 days, never touching shore.
Never touching shore. Okay. So the trench foot will be a possibility during that as well, I'm imagining.
Yeah, 100%. If I don't get trench foot, I'll consider this a success.
We're going to have you back on to see how this all went.
Yeah. Well, this is it. I think what's great about this is for everything that we talk about, there's quite often a blueprint. So you can throw around ideas, speak to people who have done it before, or, you know, even merge ideas. If you're, you know, sort of bodybuilding like Chris Gethin, but want to go into Ironman, you can just merge the two worlds. Whereas with this, I've been speaking to everyone from sailors, swimmers, and everyone's just like, I just don't know what will happen. Like, the human body's not meant to be in the water for 100 days, swimming 50K a day. So salt mouth, where your tongue basically and throat swells up from exposure to the salt water, from abrasions and chafing, from the wetsuit as well. There's just, yeah, even hypothermia. So even if I set off at June, the English summer doesn't tend to last that long. So I need to get around to Scotland, where the Highlands, in pretty good time, at least by August or September. Otherwise, you're looking at temperatures. Well, I mean, I was in Glasgow 2 months ago, and I was swimming in a canal there, and it was 2 degrees. So yeah. So I don't want to be doing that.
No.
No. When you were swimming in the Caribbean, you did not, like, you had to be pulled out of the water ultimately there, not to ruin the video for everybody. I was wondering what what that experience, what you learned from that you think you can apply here for swimming an even greater distance or greater amount of time.
Yeah, I think going back to what you said, Nick, about the sometimes an athlete's sort of superpower is just their ability to really take it to, you know, well, like you said, when they're prepared to die. I'm not saying I'm prepared to die. That's not what I'm saying at all. But all I'm saying is certainly when I got on the boat, having swum 100 kilometers. And like Nick said, not to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it, but it was a 40-kilometer swim from Martinique to St. Lucia. And I swam twice over 100 kilometers and still didn't touch the beach because the currents were so bad. So although I overswam, I still didn't make it. And when they pulled me out, I was seeing stars, you know, completely depleted of muscle glycogen. I was eating so much, but my body just wasn't basically absorbing. It wasn't assimilating all the food that I was eating. And it was, I'm not going to say it was nice to take it to that point, but even when I was on the boat, the doctor was sort of shining a light in my eye and I couldn't really see it. And I was at that point just like, oh, okay, this is what it feels like to really take it a bit too far. And so it's not, you know, I'm not saying it's nice, but I know I can push it that far, but let's not take it that far because I've got 100 days of this. So it's like, it's nice to know where that point is. And my job for 100 days will be to play with that, sort of getting as close to it as I can without overdoing it. And I think that
sounds like more of a challenge than the swimming part.
Yeah, do you know what, Heather? You're right. I think the whole thing about this is really, it's like the body is inevitably going to break down. You know, you make peace with that fact that over 100 days, I'm going to come back looking like, you know, someone from Castaway. And once you've made peace with that fact, it's just about nursing the body and just trying to get it all the way around the coast of Great Britain. That's my job, really. It's not necessarily the swimming. A successful swim will be a byproduct of efficient feeding strategies, prehab, rehab, sleeping correctly, taking care of any wounds, abrasions, chafing, salt mouth. You know, the swim will be a byproduct of doing all of that right. Basically. So it's really not, the swimming's not even the hard part in a weird way.
Have you had to just dramatically change your training in order to build up to this, or I mean, yeah, compared to the training that you did for swimming around St. Lucia, how different was the volume, or is it different?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason I probably spoke so much, and we spoke so much about the mental aspect, is because, yeah, looking at strength and conditioning, you know, said principle, specific adaptation to imposed demands, that if you want to get good at running, go and run. If you want to get good at biking, go and bike. There is no substitute to actually just doing the mileage. But there does become a point where you know how to run, you know how to swim, you know how to cycle, and that's not going to be the determining factor. It's really going to be about if you want it enough. And that's why we've spoke, I think, so much about the mental aspect, because that's really what this will come down to. So, for instance, the tide changes every 6 hours. So in theory, and weather dependent, I will have 2 6-hour periods to swim every single day. Now, that doesn't matter if it's 2 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, or if it's beautiful at 1 in the afternoon and the sun's shining. If you don't get in and swim for those 6 hours, that is a period lost, you know, and in 6 hours with the tide with you as well, you can be clocking, you know, 30 to 50 to 60 kilometers if you're prepared to swim during those 6 hours. So that's why I talk about, in terms of training, I mean, because even looking at, and what I've talked about there is almost biphasic sleep as well. So, you know, sleeping twice in a day for shorter periods, and that you can't really train for. And it's not even like I could start training now for those 50 kilometers a day, because going into it, there'd be no concept of tapering and periodization. And so a lot of this is and I forget the name of the author now, but he said one of my favorite quotes is jump and build your wings on the way down. And I think with this, that's certainly the case, that it's just a case, or like, to use a sporting example, the Tour de France. They will use the early stages of the Tour de France to actually condition their body for the latter stages. And I think this is probably, hopefully, fingers crossed, touch wood, going to be the same in theory.
Now, speaking of touching wood, just to be clear, are you pulling a log around Great Britain, or is this just you this time?
No, we're leaving the tree for this one.
Okay.
No.
He gets to come on the next trip.
Okay, because I had this, because I know that you've talked to the BBC about this as well, and I just had this image of David Attenborough narrating you snuggling with the log in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of the night. I thought, what a fantastic vision that is.
Oh, no, yeah, no tree for this one. So, like I said,
Damn
I think it was no. It felt right to leave him in the Caribbean and do this one solo. I think. I
guess it's just a good thing that I wasn't that drunken Marine in the room at that point, right? I'm like, what you got to do?
You would have dared to swim around something bigger than Great Britain. Oh my goodness.
Okay, so while you're gone, your book, The World's Fittest Book, is actually going to come out in the United States as well. So we should talk about that a little bit in case you aren't in any shape to talk to us for a while after this swim.
Yes, I want to talk to you after you finish this trip and see how you're doing. But
I mean, so I read the entire thing. I really appreciate you sending me an advanced copy, and it's totally fascinating because you talk about it throughout it, like it's a project that you were chipping away at for 10 years. Like it was a 10-year journey that you actually had in mind kind of from the start. I mean, it feels a little bit like Born to Run and books like that, where it's like, all right, I'm going to try to touch as many things as possible, learn as much as possible. So tell me what vision you had for this thing at the start versus at the end, because it's really hard to imagine you 10 years ago saying, you know where this is going to end? It's going to end with me pulling a log through the water.
Yeah. I mean, it almost happened by accident. So, I should probably start by saying, The World's Fittest Book, the title was really a testament to the people who helped create it. So, Andy Bolton, Dorian Yates, Linford Christie, all of these guys, it was really a testament to them, rather than sort of saying, I'm the world's fittest writer or anything. It wasn't that. And it was really exactly that I never intended. It was really my training journal and my travel journal. But when I was fortunate enough to train with, Andy Bolton, so for those who don't know, 7-time world powerlifting champion, first guy to deadlift 1,000 pounds, I was deadlifting with him up in Leeds, and I noticed before every lift, he'd perform these kind of knee bends before he'd lift the bar. And I was like, Andy, what are you doing there? We got talking, and he started to talk about how he was applying Verkhoshansky's principle of the depth jump. So for those who don't know, Verkhoshansky, Soviet Union strength and conditioning coach, found that if you are performing your box jumps, he found that by dropping off a platform, landing, storing that kinetic energy, so there's an eccentric contraction in the legs, you then store that elastic energy, and there is a higher, more powerful concentric contraction in the legs. Basically, by jumping off a box, landing, and then jumping, you can jump higher. So I was like, okay. So I was chatting to Andy. I was like, so is that what you're doing there? You're loading up, the legs, eccentric contractions or stretching or bending your knees, whatever you want to call it. And then deadlifting, you're performing a more powerful concentric contraction. So the bar basically lifts off the ground and you become the first man to deadlift 1,000 pounds. And he was like, well, yeah, not as, verbose and in depth as that, but yeah. So I was like, well, hang on. So that's amazing. At the time, you are the strongest human to ever live, but you've done it using speed principles. And he was like, yeah, I never thought about it like that. Then I was at Brunel University, and I was fortunate enough to train with Linford Christie, who I think still to this day is the oldest 100-meter Olympic champion. And when we were in the gym, void of the track, he was repping 160 kilos on the bench press for like 5 reps, perfect technique. And I was like, well, hang on, you are one of the fastest humans to ever live, but you are repping 160 that a powerlifter would be jealous of. So what are you doing now? Are you a strength athlete or are you a speed athlete? And then this evolved even more when I started to then live with the, fell runners up in the north of England. And I started to look at their descents. And I was like, well, hang on, running is just a body weight exercise. You're putting 3 times your own body weight through each foot, probably even more on a really steep descent. So your control of your body weight, proprioception, kinesthetic awareness, ligament, tendon strength is unbelievable. So hang on, are you now a strength athlete or are you an endurance athlete? So I kind of sat there, I was like, well, the lines are becoming completely blurred. And so the book really started as my journey to just say, how could you build the perfect human? Like, this kind of idea of human optimization. I was like, imagine taking the principles of the fell runners of England, combining that with the strength athletes like Andy Bolton, the speed athletes like Linford Christie, And I just started writing. And after 10 years, putting all of these teachings into one book, I was like, oh, wow, that kind of is a user's guide for your body.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to take any athlete and build them from the ground up, that is how I would do it.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
That's when your tagline is here's your user guide, your body's first complete user guide.
And that's one thing that's really
that.
interesting about the book is, you have these great anecdotes, these great stories with all these different people. But then there are also a number of programs in there. There's sort of like the ultimate do this first before you do anything sport specific one, which I thought was a really fascinating program. But I was wondering what you hope somebody gets out of those, right? Because you've done both very specific training and, styles of training where you're doing a lot of different things at the same time. What do you hope somebody gets from those programs in particular?
Yeah, from the book, I felt that, and it's been so nice here in England, seeing the reaction. Mel Siff, who wrote Super Training with Verkhoshansky, he talked about how the fitness industry is slightly becoming like a fast food fitness industry. So we're being sort of fed, these quick fixes and magic diet pills. And he was like, in reality, we need to just empower people. It's quite often not the answer people want to hear, because they want to believe in quick fixes and magic diet plans, but they just don't exist. And that's one thing with the book. I say, look, so much of what is in here we've known for thousands of years. I'm just the one to try and put it into a cohesive conceptual framework. Michael Foucault, a French theologian, says, I'm no guru. My job is to make windows where there were once walls. And so what I wanted people to get from this is for them to be empowered themselves to be their own personal trainer, their own nutritionist. Ralph Waldo Emerson as well, he had such an impact on this. And one of my favorite quotes of his is, if you teach a man principles, he can create his own methods. And I think so often in the fitness industry, we're taught methods. So I want to increase muscle mass, and people will say, oh, you want 5x5, you want German volume training. All of those are valid, but they're methods. Whereas if you actually teach principles of muscular hypertrophy, mechanical tension, metabolic stress, muscle damage, you can start to create your own methods. You can create your own programs. And a lot of people have even said, I'm not an elite athlete. I'm not looking to, swim 100 kilometers with a tree attached to my trunk. So I'm like, no, you don't have to. If anything, I think the book is just as valuable for, a mom or dad who's just got a family, because their time is so precious. And in the gym, they need to be so specific. Again, going back to Robert Hickson, on a cellular level, they need to be so specific about what adaptation they want. Or if something goes wrong that week, if they've got to take the kids to school and all of a sudden, or they didn't sleep that night, and all of a sudden, because of lack of sleep, ghrelin and leptin, the hormones in the stomach, they're completely out of whack, and they find that, they're reaching for the ice cream and the cookie jar, and they don't quite understand why. Well, no. Because of the world's fittest book, you're empowered to understand principles. So you understand why you're inevitably reaching for the ice cream, the chocolate bars. Mm-hmm. And so you're empowered, is essentially it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that I found was really interesting about the training programs in the book is that they're all variations of upper-lower splits or push-pull lower body splits, even the general physical preparedness GPP program. And I was wondering what that arrangement of training versus full body training for athletes, what you feel like what advantage that offers to people and to you to teach these methods.
Yeah, I found we just for the sake of simplicity, and we explain all of the principles, and then we say, but this is how I would put it into a workout. So that biomechanical split set seemed like the most obvious way to really describe it. However, with things like also as well, because again, going back to adaptive energy, looking at just 3 days per week of strength training, if you were a runner, if you were a swimmer, a cyclist, it then would allow you to really spend the majority of your time, the majority of your adaptive energy, and the majority of the volume of your training on the sport that you specifically want to do. And I think that's why we went for those types of programs. And I say we because Andy Bolton was a huge help on the the strength aspect. He trains a lot of strength athletes, but also as well people coming to him saying, I want to be stronger, but this is actually my sport. I'm a football player, I'm a rugby player. So you have to really consider that sometimes strength training, like a lot of the workouts in the book, can be brilliant on their own. If that's the only workout you want to do, you just want a strength workout. But if it's supplementary to your other goals, your other sports, it can also be used like that as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say, when Nick first handed me this book, I thought it was very bold of you to put the world's fittest book on the cover. And then after reading it, I get where you're coming from with that. So, but I do think a very apt subtitle would be the world's best adventure book, because you travel all over the world, you meet all these amazing people, and you get to really kind of take their knowledge and distill it down into this. I mean, it's not a short book, but you really get to the point on everything. And then also,
I read it in the day. I'll put that out there.
Show off. He's just showing off. But then the other thing that I really appreciate is you take all these sayings and these adages and these quotes that we've heard before, and then applying them to fitness in this way, because really that's something that's universal for people, and anybody can relate to wanting to feel better, feel stronger, run faster. And so, just taking just that Emerson quote and actually applying it to how you treat your body is such a powerful message. And
the book actually starts with talking about Ralph Waldo Emerson. It doesn't start with Sif and Verkhoshansky and Selye. It starts with Ralph Waldo Emerson.
I expected to open it up and see a bunch of weights and dumbbells, and I open it up and we're talking about great writers, and I'm like, wait a second, what?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good point. What do you feel like reading philosophy really? Where does that resonate with fitness for you? Obviously, the two are part of the same conversation.
Yeah. Firstly, you really have it. That's so sweet of you guys. Thank you. Honestly, I get a bit not choked up, but I think because it was 10 years of writing. So when I actually put it out there, I'm still nervous. And obviously, having listened to you guys in the podcast, I was so nervous sending you a copy. So
we're not going to have you on if we don't read it.
But no, that is really sweet. But no, yeah, I think I almost call it fitness philosophy, because I think, we have to really just question everything. And it's almost like this physiological intuition that you should just constantly ask questions, not just about the book, not just about studies, but your own body as well, your own knowledge. Like the whole sort of book evolved from the quote that I quite often say that, there are many ways to get fitter, stronger, leaner. Don't discriminate against any or favor one. As soon as you do, you close your mind and limit your potential. And I think that almost goes back to Bruce Lee, in that Bruce Lee at the time sat there and was like, well, hang on, what is the best martial arts? Like, what is the best sort of human combat sport? Because boxing only uses your hands, and then you got jiu-jitsu where it's wrestling, you got Greco wrestling, you got kickboxing, and that was where he started to experiment with Jeet Kune Do, which really is MMA today. Like, he was an absolute pioneer of that movement, and seeing how MMA is involved has been incredible. And I think and again, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, but Nassim Taleb, one of my favorite authors, nothing to do with fitness as well. He's an economist, but he said, and I love his quote, which is, as humans facing limited knowledge, always resort to prescribed ideas and narratives. And what I mean by that, or what I took that from that to mean to fitness, is with limited knowledge, these prescribed ideas and narratives is we can look at people and go, oh, he's a big guy, he's a bodybuilder. Oh, look at that guy, he's quite skinny, he must be a runner. But really, like, we're all human, and the body is so much more powerful than that. And what I almost wanted to do with the book is just to get like everybody speaking, like Bruce Lee, I think, wanted to do with martial arts. I wanted to do with fitness. I would love it if, ultra runners are no longer scared to go and, chat to the powerlifters and hang out in the squat rack. And equally, powerlifters and bodybuilders won't be scared to go and run an ultra marathon, or not necessarily an ultra marathon, even just a 5 or a 10K, in fear that their muscles will waste away, and it sounds quite, I don't know what the right word is here, but like this utopia I want to live in, that is just where, like, everybody, because we're all just trying to optimize our, the body that we've been given. And it would be amazing if we all start thinking rather than, and I think you know, not to go down this rabbit hole. I think at the moment, sometimes it's like, oh, the bodybuilders don't speak to the powerlifters, who don't speak to the CrossFitters, who don't speak to the swimmers, who don't speak to, and it's like, you know, we're all one, you know.
Yeah.
Well, that makes perfect sense. And I think the internet has allowed all of these people who feel limited by those groups when you're in the gym and you think, oh God, I can't talk to that person. Those people are out there finding one another. And, you know, and oddly, I've been reading a lot of, do you know who Percy Cerruti is? He was an Australian running coach in the mid 20th century. He was huge on strength training. This is back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, right? And yeah, there have been people throughout history who really just, they looked at it and said, this makes no sense to think one way or the other. There's so many benefits to be had from all styles of training.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I'm a massive fan, to talk about running, like Emil Zatopek, you know, arguably the greatest endurance runner ever. And, you know, some of his training, like, is 100 400-meter sprints.
Ugh.
You know, just obscene. So he pioneered interval training. But you're absolutely right, Nick. Every now and then, I love that you get an athlete or a coach or somebody who just thinks completely differently and just says, like, do you know what? I'm going to rip up the rule book on, you know, overtraining. And that's exactly what Emil Zatopek did. And look what he achieved.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the best things will be, or the biggest compliment I get when people have read the book, is people say, oh, it's inspired my own journey. I'm now thinking differently about my training. And I think if I was to get a message in a few months or a few years to say, oh, I read your book, it inspired me to do something different, and, you know, I've just set a world record or even just a personal achievement, I'll be like, do you know what? It was worth writing.
Sure.
For years.
Last night, I'll add that it inspired me to get out Self-Reliance by Ralph Waldo Emerson, which is something I reread every couple of years, and it had been a little while. I just absolutely love that, and you had me getting it out and reading it on the bedstand last night.
Oh, wow.
But I was wondering also, as you prepare for something that's such a mental and emotional challenge like what you're about to start, do you find yourself reading more fitness and more sailing, or do you find yourself reading more philosophy to prepare yourself?
Good question. A bit of both. But at the moment, a lot of philosophy. So honestly, I think about 50 books that I've just ordered that I'm taking on the boat with me. That are, and I would say 80–90% of them are philosophy. Only reason being, I think it gets to the point where my split times and swimming and my nutritional strategy is just all down to a point. Like I'm not to say I've got it figured out, because a lot could go wrong, but I'm not going to get any better as a swimmer. And I'm sort of sitting here thinking, what would make the biggest impact, or what's going to be the biggest contributor of success? Is it trying to shave, you know, 1 second off my 100-meter split? Or would it be trying to unearth some sort of philosophy that I can tap into at any given moment when I'm swimming around the Highlands in pitch black and, you know, 7-foot waves are just hitting me in the face? You know, what could I draw upon? So,
wow.
Yeah. So I mean, like I said, I would love to. I have no idea what's going to happen. I would love to catch up with you guys afterwards and say, oh, I had this epiphany when I was swimming across the Irish Sea. I don't know if that would be the case. I certainly hope it is.
Definitely take a notebook and jot down some notes.
So you're going to be listening to audiobooks, though. That's interesting. So you'll have your earphones out there, and you'll be listening to Ralph Waldo Emerson, and hopefully some Nietzsche in there as well.
Oh yeah, no. So it's all. So yeah, with open water swimming, you're not allowed. This sounds so weird. You're not allowed headphones because it's considered an aid. So it's all being done with the right rules and restrictions. So I'm not allowed. So it will literally be reading as much as I can during my downtime, and then when you've got that sort of sensory deprivation, you can't hear anything, or swimming at night, you can't see anything. It would just be going over everything that I've just read. So there'll be this real element of sort of like reading a book and then thinking, right, I'm now going to be swimming for 30 hours so I can actually mull over what I've just read.
So you're getting a waterproof copy of Ralph Waldo Emerson to read in the Irish Sea then? I don't quite understand.
Oh, no, he gets to just be alone with his thoughts.
Yeah, we've got on the boat. Oh, did it cut out?
Oh, no, we're here.
We're here.
Oh, you're back. Yeah. No. So I've got my own cabin on the boat, and then it would just be downtime. So like I said, that biphasic sleep. 6 hours, 6 hours in the water, 6 hours on the boat, 6 hours on.
Okay. Okay. Then now it's making a little bit more sense.
Right.
Can you get us a copy of your reading list? I would be totally fascinated to see what was on your shelf on the book or on the boat.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll send you a picture as well, because the cabin looks amazing. So it is, like I said, it's a tiny little cabin, and I've just kind of decided to forego space and comfort for books instead. So I'll send you a picture as well.
That'd be wonderful. Well, best of luck with that. I'm hoping that there will be a full video series documenting this one as well.
Yes, at least take a notebook and jot down your thoughts, because I'm curious to see what 6 hours of swimming with your own thoughts will do.
I will. And yeah, on this one, it's there are weekly video diaries on the Red Bull YouTube channel. So it's gonna, I think the nice thing about this, with the events in the past, we've shot them and then it's been live a few months after. Whereas with this, and then also my own social media. So with this, it's going to be very much in real time. So you'll be able to see my body breaking down over the 100 days. Real time. So yeah.
Okay, so yeah, let's make this easy for people to find. You're on Instagram in particular, it seems like,
Yes.
and Red Bull's YouTube channel. What day is this all going to start?
It's looking weather dependent on June the 1st. So
okay, so very soon.
Very soon, yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for making some time to talk with us beforehand on such a short deadline. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Not at all. No. There's been a lot of fun.
Well,
but yeah, like, it would be good to tune in afterwards. I would just love to actually get your opinion on maybe the few of the things that I've discovered, or, you know, like I said, I'm hoping for a sea-based epiphany of some sort. So it would be good to check in afterwards.
Yeah, I hope you find something out there, some clarity. Plus, the world's fittest book will be out in a month or so in the United States and is out in the UK now and doing very well. So, Ross Edgley, thank you so much for coming and talking with us.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, guys. Thank you.